Let's get dirty. Alright guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining me. Today I want to show you how you can make your own orchid or epiphyte potting mix. First, let's run through the list of ingredients. There's only 4 of them, and as we're making it, I'll talk about why each one of these ingredients is important to the mix. This guy over here. So first up, you get your coarse fir bark. Then in equal amount, you have your fine fir bark. And then finally, you've got perlite and charcoal. So I'm going to go ahead and mix all these guys together. And as I mix each one of these ingredients, I'm going to talk about why it's an important component of making your own orchid potting mix. So first up, you need a tray or a big bucket or something that will hold the mixture. So we're going to use our coarse fir bark. Now some of these pieces are quite big. I break them up as I go along. Probably these are ideal. This might be getting a little bit big, but it's okay depending on how big your orchid is. That's kind of what you want to see. So orchids and other epiphytes, they don't really grow in soil. In their native habitats around the world, oftentimes they'll grow on trees or on top of rotting logs. Their roots are built to be exposed to the air. So it goes against, traditional gardening where we're always burying our roots in soil and then covering them up and watering them. Orchids don't grow that way. And it's why a lot of people have trouble growing orchids, because they're applying traditional planting methods to these plants that simply don't grow that way. So you need a coarse bark because you need that aeration. And the surfaces of this bark are what's going to hold the nutrients and what the roots are going to grab onto. Okay? So a lot of people will just use that. And that's fine. A lot of orchids will grow great like that. But I always find it beneficial to also add in an equal amount of the finely ground bark. So you can see how this is all shredded up. It's still quite light. It's still quite airy, but it gives an added moisture retention level that those giant pieces of fir bark just don't have. Most of these orchids, they grow in the tropics with 100% relative humidity. Well, here in Victoria, we don't have that, but I can recreate that in an orchid pot. And so you want that fine mixture in there. Honestly, I find it just works a lot better. And so lastly, we have our perlite and our charcoal. Now, perlite is very light. It's a volcanic glass, and it's used mainly for aeration, to create pockets of air and channels for roots to find its way through. It also lightens the mix, and it's why you see perlite in virtually every commercial potting mix. I don't remember seeing a potting mix without perlite. Now, do be careful with the perlite. It does produce a dust. That dust is known to be harmful, so just be careful when you're mixing it, possibly wear a mask. Now, the last ingredient is hardwood charcoal. Now, charcoal is great. It is great for Phalaenopsis. It is great for orchids and epiphytes. Like perlite, it adds to drainage, but it does a few other things as well. It's an inert material that can actually absorb nutrients and release them later as the plants need it. And with a coarse mixture like this, that sheds a lot of water and doesn't have very much in the way to keep hold of your nutrients, having this charcoal in there is a great benefit. So it'll add aeration, it'll hold on to nutrients, it'll also neutralize the pH. So oftentimes when we fertilize, we get these huge swings in pH, whether it gets acidic or alkaline, and plants don't like those big swings. So this charcoal sort of helps to neutralize that. just go ahead and mix that in. So the ratio of the components that I use is about 50% coarse fir bark, 50% fine fir bark. Then I'll take that total mixture and I'll mix in 5 to 10% of the perlite and charcoal. And that's it. That is essentially a commercial grade orchid potting mix. And you can make it for a fraction of what this stuff costs to buy in the store. So I made this for probably less than $3. And this would fill one of those 5-liter bags that can cost up to 12 bucks, depending on where you buy it. So you can use this mix right away to pot your orchids. And most people do. You know, they'll go buy a bag of orchid potting mix. They will take the orchid out of their pot, you know, repot using the new mix, and then they'll add a liquid fertilizer. Now, to me, liquid fertilizing an orchid is a useless endeavor. And the reason for that is the nature of this mix sheds water. This mix is designed not to hold water because that'll rot, you know, your orchid or your epiphyte. And so if the mix is constantly shedding its water, why would you fertilize with a liquid fertilizer? Yes, the charcoal will hold some. Yes, the fine fir bark does hold a little bit of moisture, but 90% of your nutrients is going to flow right through the mixture. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to waste fertilizer like that. So what I personally do is I'll use a dry mix. And I make my own dry mix. Now there's 6 ingredients in my dry mixture, and they're all used in equal parts. So I have alfalfa meal, which is a slow release nitrogen fertilizer, canola meal, which also is a slow release nitrogen fertilizer. I use organic rock phosphate, which is probably the best source of phosphorus that you can use in a potting mixture. Now the 4th ingredient is ground oyster flakes. Now ground oyster flakes are an excellent source of calcium for your soil, as well as other trace minerals and elements. And the 5th ingredient is elemental sulfur. Now sulfur is a macro ingredient. It is right up there with your NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Sulfur and magnesium are right up there. And that leads me into my final ingredient, which is Epsom salt. The Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. So the magnesium sulfate is quite dissolvable in water. So that's why I also use the elemental sulfur, because elemental sulfur is only activated in soils. So it takes a long time to break down. So I know that that elemental sulfur will continue to provide this plant with sulfur nutrients that it needs going forward. So I usually mix in this fertilizer at about half the ratio of what my perlite and charcoal mixture was. So maybe 5% of the total mixture. And then just go ahead and mix that up. So that's it, guys. That's how you make your own orchid potting mix. Now, all these ingredients are readily available at any garden center or home improvement center. If you do have trouble locating, some of the fertilizers, you can buy dry orchid fertilizer and incorporate that into the mix. I do suggest you do something like that. I just don't see the point in a liquid fertilizer for orchids. One more tip before you're potting is possibly to pre-soak the fine fir mixture and then mix up this batch 1 to 2 days before you're ready to pot. Reason being is a lot of times these coarse mixtures can become hydrophobic. And so yes, you don't want your orchids standing in water, but they do need access to moisture. And if your potting mix becomes hydrophobic, that water will literally go right through and it will not be available to your plants. So nothing wrong with a good pre-soak, before you start to pot up your plants. So that's it for today, guys. I hope the video was helpful for you. I know that orchids aren't a crop plant, and we don't eat them, but I do really like them around the house. And honestly, their flowers, nothing in the plant world compares. As always, leave any questions or comments down below. I'd love to hear about how you grow orchids and maybe some of the mixes you've come up with to grow the best orchids. Click subscribe if you haven't already. For those of you that have, I really do appreciate the support. And I'll see you next time.